Hello, and thank you for joining us in the first of a five-part series addressing an article recently put out by Harvard Magazine that many of you may already be familiar with, titled The Risks of Homeschooling. The author, Elizabeth Bartholet, a Harvard Law professor and director of the Harvard Law's School Child Advocacy Program, made many blatant attacks on homeschooling and parental rights. The article stirred up a lot of emotion across the homeschool community, from frustration to concern and fear. It also seemed to produce an urgency in many to get involved and active in defending truth and our freedoms. The response to the article was incredible. Many wonderful pieces were written in return, clarifying the misconceptions Professor Bartholet made. We heard responses from many Harvard alumni, as well as HSLDA, Newsweek, the New York Post, Rush Limbaugh, and more, all criticizing Bartholet's piece and standing behind parental rights and homeschooling. Nonetheless, our homeschool community has been made aware once again that we have an enemy. Our homeschool freedoms are under attack and we need to be vigilant. So today and this entire week, we have brought on an expert to talk with us about this article. Alison Slatter is with us to discuss a few of the biggest questions parents are posing around this article. Alison has received her bachelor's degree in speech and hearing sciences from Indiana University before beginning a near decade-long career in Washington, D.C. on Capitol Hill. She has over 30 years of extensive political work since she began working in the political world at the age of 14. She left the professional political world to educate and raise her children, including two dyslexic. She serves on the government affairs team for IAHE, which is Indiana's state homeschool organization. All that to say, Alison is the perfect person to talk with us today about the latest attack on homeschool, as she is not only an expert, but a passionate homeschool mom herself. Over the next week, Alison will be answering a question a day to not only share with us, but to help equip us with a defense. Welcome, Alison.
Hi, nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
Good. Thank you. So today I'd like to have you just do a quick overview of this article, and then discuss one of the biggest burning questions, which is this truly a grassroots effort or is it more astroturfing? And for those of you that maybe haven't heard the term astroturfing, because I had to look it up. Astroturfing is basically it's spreading a sponsor or organization's propaganda and disguising it as public opinion, as opposed to a grassroots movement, which is a real organic movement. And Alison will go into that a little bit in more detail. So Alison, do you want to give us a quick rundown of this piece and then talk to us about the motive behind it?
Sure. Okay, so in the Harvard Magazine it's a Harvard Magazine for, I believe, it's for alumni. It's not connected necessarily directly to the university, but indirectly. But Professor Bartolet authored and submitted a law review that went to, I believe, the Arizona Law
Mm-hmm.
Review for
Mm-hmm.
publication. And essentially what she calls for was an outright ban on homeschooling across the nation, or a presumptive ban. And once the onus to be on us parents to prove why our children should be homeschooled, as opposed to it being apparent that we have the right to do so. So that's really where this is coming from. And the article there was some clearly they've never talked to an actual homeschooler in their lives, because some of the things that they claimed in there were just off the wall.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know about you, but anyone who is a Christian knows that lots of people call themselves Christian that aren't necessarily fundamentalist Christians. Okay. I'm not a fundamentalist Christian, but I certainly follow the Bible and believe it's God's word, and try to live my life according to the ideas that Jesus Christ put ahead of us. So that's my goal. Am I a fundamentalist? Well, I suppose to an atheist, I might look like one, but really and truly, when it comes to the whole religious, realm, I'm really not. I'm a pretty mainstream, sensible Christian, just like most people who also claim to be Christian.
Right. And you're saying this because she kind of claimed that most
Right.
Christians are fundamentalists. That was a little bit of
She
her.
claimed that 90% of homeschoolers were, which she didn't back it up with any data of any kind.
No. And we will revisit that topic in a couple of days. We're going to talk about where is the data, where is the proof. So make sure you come back to hear that.
Yes. So there was no data. There's no proof. She's claiming that homeschoolers teach white supremacism. She's claiming that we're fundamentalist homeschoolers, that we teach female subservience. I can assure you, I am not a subservient female. I have never been accused of such a thing in my life. Perhaps that's not necessarily a good thing on my part, but but that's just not how God made me. And fortunately, I have a husband who loves all of that about me. And there's plenty of wonderful men that do. So, needless to say, she really has her shoes on wrong with this one, and she rightly got taken to task for everything she said because it was ridiculous.
Yes.
And there are fantastic rebuttals out there. I highly encourage people, if you have the time to read it, go read. There are some really good ones. Now, as for astroturfing versus grassroots,
Yes.
so I tend to work in the world of analogies. So I view astroturfing is it looks real. So just like a real astroturf that's going to be on your football field or baseball field, whatever sport is you're choosing, it looks real from the stands. You cannot tell that it's anything but grass. But as you get closer and you start getting down onto the field, you start realizing that it's not real at all. It's man-made. It's synthetic. And so that's what astroturfing is there's this issue that appears to be, real, a real problem. But when you start peeling back the layers, you start noticing that it's all fake, that there's only just a handful of people that are behind it and they have special interests. And that's why they're making a big stink about it. Not because there's, hundreds of thousands of people who feel the same way. It's really about just a few people who have an agenda
with a very loud voice.
With a very loud voice. Exactly right. So that's how I always see astroturfing.
Okay.
Grassroots is kind of the opposite of that. It does tend to be loud. It does tend to be pretty widespread, and it's real. It is real live grass, just like you have out in your front yard, or unless you're in Florida or Arizona. But it's real. People genuinely are unhappy with what's happening. They generally are ready to have a real issue over this. That's the difference between grassroots and astroturfing. So now the question is this article astroturfing or grassroots? Well, I would say that it has some elements of both. Because I'm not, so there's a few things that I'm seeing that's missing in this particular issue. I don't see a lot of really well-heeled, well-funded patrons. I mean, I'm sure they're there, but I can't just say, ooh, right there. An example would be Red for Ed. I can stick a finger. I mean, it's really easy because all over the Red for Ed signs, it has NEA on it. I know it's the National Education Association.
Gotcha.
It's boom, clear. It's so, in my state with the Red for Ed, I could tell that something wasn't quite meeting because they were hammering on about teacher pay, which my husband's a teacher, so I'm all for teacher pay. So they were hammering on teacher pay in a non-budget year. Our legislature only does budgets every other year, yet they kept hammering home on the legislature about teacher pay. Well, the budget was set last year.
Right.
There's nothing they can do this year. So why are they harping on about budget this year?
Right. What's the angle?
Right. So the only thing I could gather from that is really has absolutely nothing to do about teachers, nothing to do with their pay, has everything to do about the power that they can leverage. So that to me is astroturfing.
Gotcha.
Okay. That's what I see. Oh, big money.
Right.
Yes, they are stirring up the teachers, certainly. Gosh, boy, are they. But when I start kind of looking into it and start looking at the logic of what they're advocating for, I'm going, that doesn't make any sense. That's not logical. That's when I know, oh, they're just trying to foment excitement over something because clearly they have an agenda that has nothing to do with what they say. Okay. Also, National School Choice Week. I have no idea who funds them. Several years ago, they used to have their the people who fund them on their website. They've since taken it down. I've not seen it. I know a friend of mine asked to see who funds them. Never got a response back.
Wow.
But back when they did post them, it was your school choice groups, ones that were pretty interested in making sure homeschoolers had tax dollars. So
there you go.
Yeah. As far as my organization, we don't advocate for taking of taxpayer money.
No,
and actually, this hopefully at some point in time in the 5 days, we'll get into why that's an issue. Why is taking tax dollars an issue? for us
Ooh.
because it gets into all of this. But
I
we'll
would
get there
love that.
in
And
the
if
end.
we don't hit that, let's have you back and talk about that because that is a
Yep.
very we might do a separate session on that because that is a huge topic that I would love to address because
Yes.
it isn't just, well, we do and you don't, so we're better and you're not, which is sometimes
No,
how it feels. It's there are real reasons behind it. There are actual,
absolutely.
I mean, logical reasons behind it that I really think that if we talk about, most people are going to agree with. So let's make sure that we come back. So everybody stay tuned. We will be back. If it's not in this 5-day series, we will make sure we come back and discuss that.
Yeah, because that it really is huge, and it's not just about fear mongering. It really
No.
isn't. There's real, chicken before the egg kind of thing that's going on there. And
Hmm.
if you don't take taxpayer money, there's nowhere for the government to go. Really, I mean, they can try, but
Right.
they have a much harder case.
Exactly.
But
Exactly.
we can get into that later. And another thing that I see a lot in astroturfing is they're very loud and very in your face, like the Red for Ed, closing down the
Okay.
schools, just, not rioting. Ooh, that's awful. Cut that out. No, but protesting, which is a perfectly
Protesting.
legal thing for them to do, and
Right.
that's perfectly fine. I got no objection to them protesting. Now, whether or not they're doing it on school time is quite another story, but
Right.
be that as it may, they have the right to do so, and I do not object to that. Um, but they tend to be pretty out there. You know exactly
Right.
who they are. Um, but I would say that the thing that kind of is motivating Professor Bartolet's analysis or legal theory has actually been around for a really long time, but they are operating very, very subtly. They're not loud. They're not in your face.
Mm,
They're not actually leaving their whole agenda out in the open. It's not there. It's unless you're completely involved in public policy and you eat, breathe, and sleep it like I do, which I don't recommend to other people doing, but but it is unfortunately the way God made me, and here we are. So, but for those of us who are actually following public policy, we've been noticing this for years. This is not something that's just all of a sudden. It's a logical culmination of what we've been seeing. This is nothing unusual, and I think you can see that particularly in the medical field, because I'm sure we can all remember medical kidnappings from England. Do you remember that? Alfie
right.
Evans and
Right.
who was the other kid's name? Charlie Gard. The medical community came in and said, "Oh, you parents don't know what you're talking about. We're going to take over
Right.
the care of this child because clearly you can't."
Right.
And Professor Bartolet's theory would generally support that.
Right.
That's what she's really saying is that kids aren't yours; they're really the state's. And the
Right.
state, when they determine you're no longer doing a good job as a parent, they can come in and usurp your control.
Right.
That's what they're saying. So you have that component where I think it's coming in from the child advocacy medical community. I think you would also see it quite a lot in your child protective services.
Hmm.
Not all child protective services people are that way. Don't get me wrong. There's some who absolutely adore homeschoolers, but there are those who don't,
Right.
and we all know
Right.
who they are. And so I've heard that specifically from those two strains in particular, the
Hmm.
medical field and the child advocates. I've definitely heard that. Um, But also, I think there is a genuine grassroots movement in the sense that we have a lot of disillusioned homeschool graduates who, for whatever reason, felt that their homeschooling experience was not one that they wanted. It's not
Right.
something that they would want even for their children.
Right.
And as such, I think they really feel like the government, if the government had had oversight and control, they would have been spared some of the hurt and heartache that they had to go through, which, I completely understand that. I mean, I come from a broken home and I went through a lot of despair and heartache too. And being sent to public school didn't make it better.
Hmm.
It
I
really
agree.
didn't. It happens anywhere, it happens everywhere in every educational outlet. So, you know, abused children happen in government schools, they happen in charter schools, they happen in online public schools, they happen in homeschools, they happen everywhere.
Right.
And I think there's that hope that the government would have saved them. And you know what? I don't know any homeschooling family on the face of the earth that has a cold shoulder to that. Obviously, we don't want children to be abused, and we sure would have wished that they had had a better experience, of
Right.
course. And so my heart goes out to them and my prayers that they find healing and and are able to use what happened for the good of others. And I do
Right.
want that for them. But let's also keep in mind that for many children, homeschooling is actually preventing them from being abused.
Right.
Children are abused in schools all the time. Often, particularly special needs children, are abused in school regularly. And as such, homeschooling allows those families that safeguard of being able to come out of an abusive situation and bring them into a loving and nurturing environment. And I think that needs to be left open. And also, it needs to be left open without government intervention, because my kids are dyslexic, and I can assure you the vast majority of public school teachers, excuse me, government school teachers, do not know how to handle it the way I do, with a degree in speech and hearing sciences, which included language acquisition, development, and disorders. I understand it. I can help
Right.
them with it much better than many teachers. So,
Right.
again, just because it's a government school, just because it's a government teacher, doesn't mean that they're going to understand that disability better than the parent. In my case, I would not be allowed to teach in a school, but yet I'm far more qualified than the average teacher to teach my kids on this.
Right, right. So
So,
that's all really important information to get out there and to get across, but to look at, and we're going to come back, I think it's Wednesday, and talk more about, where is there proof, is there data about this abuse allegation she made. But
mhm,
for today, it does seem to me as well, and like you said, Allison, that a bit of what's behind this is, there are some people who just have a personal experience in life
mhm,
that they are carrying into this, that this is
yes.
not as much about really the education or well-being of your children or even my children, but just an experience that they had in life that has led to this kind of being their personal mission,
Yep.
for whatever reason. Maybe it's a process of them thinking that for whatever reason. But all that to say is that should not be the motive behind any sort of greater agenda and greater legislation. That should never be the motive, just our own
Well,
personal stories.
and what they're discounting is that for my generation, where there were a lot of families being broken apart, patched back together with step families, and I, I mean, many of us come from very broken backgrounds, and the reality is that I look at my husband and my children, and I say, I'm finally going to get to build the family I never had, because my parents either wouldn't or couldn't provide that for me. How
Right,
many other how many other parents are doing the exact same thing? It's not sufficient enough for my children and I to inhabit the same household. We want relationship. We want
hmm,
to nurture. We want to love. None of those things are abuse. Those things are love. And that is
right,
what we're saying that we want for these kids. And that's where kids thrive. Is when they're
absolutely.
loved and when they're accepted and when they're nurtured. And what we know as latchkey kids. I was also a latchkey kid. So latchkey kid, divorced family, all kinds of wonderful, fun things. And I can assure you that being in public school doesn't mean you don't go through bad stuff. You do. And sometimes you do it even more alone than if you were in a family unit. Oh, and on
Right.
top of it, I was also an only child. So I literally had to do it all by myself. But that's okay. I mean, with the help of God and, some interesting years, we worked through it, and now I get to build that family, and I have that relationship with my children that I would have loved having with my parents, but because they didn't even live in the same house and they had their own interests and agendas,
Right.
never were developed. And instead, I'm saying, you know what? I loved my career on Capitol Hill. I loved what I did, but there is nothing more important than what I'm building right now. This career, this family, this life. This
Right.
is, as I like to tell people, oh, I make a living. Because people always like to say, oh, well, do you make a living?
Right.
Yeah, I make a great living. I don't get paid, but I have a fabulous living.
Right. I'm investing
So,
in things of eternal value. I mean, that's really what it
absolutely.
comes down to.
Absolutely. And
Right.
that's where we come down, is that, what they're discounting is that while their family in that circumstance was not a good family for them, there's lots of families where it's a wonderful environment, and that's exactly what these children need.
Right. Right. Exactly. Yeah. And one negative experience for one does not dictate what happens for
No.
all. So, um, okay. So
Well, we
I
have a saying we have a
yeah.
saying in legislature, and the saying in public policy is, "Hard cases make bad law."
Oh, that's so good. Hard cases make bad law. And that's what we
Mhm.
really need to look at here is, um, whoever is behind this, it seems very clear that this, what we just discussed, astroturfing versus grassroots, but whoever is behind this and whatever their motive is, you're right. Hard cases make bad law. And so regardless, it would not be something to base law on.
Right.
But I want to go back as we close out to something you said, that this is not new. So as parents,
No.
so many parents just read this article or got wind of the Harvard summit that was just recently postponed. And I got so many calls of panicked parents saying this is brand new. We've always had these homeschool freedoms and now all of a sudden they're under attack. And I want parents to know that this is not new. And in fact, in my state, in my lifetime, parents were jailed for what we do. And it was due to the dedication of many that we are where we are. So parents, we don't want you to freak out. This isn't new. There are people in place that have an eye out for this, that are defending, but we also want you to be aware, be keenly aware that this isn't brand new. It's been happening all along. And the reality is it's going to continue to happen because we do have an enemy that whenever we step out in faith and do things God's way, we do have an enemy that doesn't like it. So we're going to come back on Friday also, and everybody needs to be here Friday because we're going to talk about, so what does this mean for you? What are you to do? It's not new. It's always been around, but it's amping up again. So what can we as parents do? How can we get involved? How can we proactive? And I'll give you a little hint about what we're going to talk about on Friday. Standing on the sidelines isn't going to do any good. So we will discuss what you guys can do to defend your freedoms. But for now, just tune in each day and get yourself
Complacency is your enemy.
totally your enemy.
So one of the things you can do to not be complacent is to listen to all 5 of them.
All 5 of them. Get educated, know what we're talking about. Ignorance doesn't help anybody. And I know sometimes when we hear this stuff, I know for me, I want to just la 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 la. I don't want to hear it. It's scary. I don't want to, talk about it. But that's not the right answer. So we're going to give you some tools. But like Alison said, be here tomorrow. Alison, we appreciate your insight and your expertise into this. We can't thank you and all the homeschool advocates across our nation for the time and energy that you put into defending our freedoms. So everybody join us back here tomorrow with Alison, and we're going to discuss the response to this article from those outside of the community and how people outside the homeschool community, how are people outside of our community responding to this? So we will see you all back here tomorrow at 10 o'clock in the morning for part 2.
Great. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.